The Chicago Strangler is a mystery that really stuck with me. Despite researching so many awful people, this story is just one I couldn't get out of my head. I first talked about him in my The Worst Serial Killers Never Caught video. In this video, I presented a basic analysis and mainly focused on the fact that there was a serial killer likely still active and killing a lot of people in Chicago and how terrifying that is. But this time, I'm going to connect the dots of this case and come to my conclusion for who committed the Chicago Stranglings. So, sit tight as this is going to be a ride and let's begin the investigation. I started with the basics. 75 women have been strangled in Chicago, with 51 of those going unsolved. Most of the women were strangled with a rope or bare hands, but some of them were asphyxiated with a plastic bag. If we look at the murders in 2001, the first year where the pattern emerges, 6 women died and the locations of their bodies show that the killer is focused in the south and west sides. The profile of victims seems random at first, no constant in race or age, ranging from people in their 20s to 60s. However, I don't think they're random at all. He picks people that won't be remembered by society. It has mostly been a silent vigil. There have been few news stories and even fewer memorials or other public gestures that would focus attention on these women and how they died. This monster murders primarily prostitutes and black women that unjustly but unfortunately will bring him much less attention. The bodies are usually dumped in bins, dumpsters, alleyways or abandoned buildings, some even set on fire, places that won't bring attention to him. My next step was to look at the origin of this theory and who collected this data and made it public. This was primarily the Murder Accountability Project founded by Thomas Hargrove. He built an AI that could detect potential serial killers in clusters of unsolved homicides. His AI had been warning of a serial killer in Chicago for years, but when this whole story went properly public, and it was worse than anyone could have imagined. 51 women dead with no sign of slowing down. So I got in contact with Thomas Hargrove and asked him a few questions. Firstly, I asked if he thinks there were more strangulations after 2018, and he said, there is no reason to believe the pattern stops after 51 deaths. But before we answer who is the Chicago Strangler, we must look at why the 51 strangulations weren't committed by 51 separate people. The map cluster theory provides an answer to this. This states that groups of similar homicides with lower than expected clearance rates have an elevated probability of containing serial killings. We can see this with another serial killer. Gary Ridgway, also known as the Green River Killer, is America's second worst serial killer of all time. A cluster can be seen in the Seattle area with weapon type other or unknown in the 1990s and 2000. The clearance rate there is 25 to 33%. That number becomes incredibly important when we look at this table. This shows the homicide numbers and clear rates in the city of Chicago. We can see that the clear rate for guns is 51.9% and for knives is 81.1%. For beatings, which is the closest thing to strangulations, is 80.2%. The average solve rate for homicide in Chicago is 60.8%. So then why is strangulation and asphyxiation, which is a very personal way to kill someone that likely leaves behind more evidence and DNA, at 27.9%, the lowest by far on the list? If there wasn't a serial killing in there, it would be a pretty large coincidence. We can also look at the homicide clearance rate in the USA to give us an idea how likely it would be to get away with murder. As you can see, quite shockingly, around 95% of homicides were solved in 1965, and that number has plummeted to around 55% in 2020. I think this proves it's absolutely possible to get away with murder in modern times. Just flip a coin. The second major piece of information Thomas Hargrove gave me was that he believes there is more than one Chicago Strangler. In fact, he believes there to be 3, and then he gave me the name of a suspect that is currently being investigated by police. Darren Dion Van, a serial killer arrested in Hammond in 2014 for the murders of 7 people, all of them by strangulation and then dumping their bodies in abandoned buildings. Now, there was a lot of evidence that there is a connection between Van and the Strangler, so I think it's about time I introduced you to the board. This is all the evidence I've found gathered into one convenient place. We'll start with this link just here. Van is a 50-year-old male whose MO fits with the Strangler pretty perfectly. Although all his murders were in 2014, he claims his killings go back decades, and there's evidence to prove he's telling the truth. Thomas Hargrove's algorithms show that there was a possibility of a serial killer in Gary, Indiana, with 15 suspicious deaths between 1980 and 2008. However, despite urging the authorities to look for something, they denied Hargrove's findings. But then, couldn't his claims of killing for decades just refer to these crimes that have nothing to do with the Chicago case? Well, I do believe that it's likely he was responsible for some or all of these murders. However, he's linked to Chicago by this quote. Illinois probably has they have a whole lot more than Indiana. Let's put it at that. They have way more than Indiana. This refers to how many people he killed in each state. And not only is Chicago located in Illinois, but it's also just across the border from Gary, the city Darren killed in, and Hammond, the city he was arrested in. Van was very quick to confess that he'd been active since 1990, and after he was arrested for one murder, showed the police where the other 6 bodies were. So if he's willing to cooperate with police, why hasn't he confessed to the Chicago Stranglings, if he did them? Well, he gave an answer to this in an interview explaining that he didn't want to risk being cross-prosecuted between 2 different states as it may delay his execution in Indiana. In the same interview, he claimed he chose his victims at random, which does go against the theory that he picks his victims to bring less attention to himself and may just be because sex workers are often out at night and likely easier targets. So, in recap, we have a serial killer who murders 7 people in a city just down the road from Chicago in the same manner as the Strangler, who confessed to killing a lot of people in the same state as Chicago, with a reason to not tell police any details about his other crimes, and suspicion and confession he's been killing for decades. It's safe to say he's a prime suspect. It is also likely that you can make a connection between external events in his life and the murders. We can show this by looking at this graph that shows how many people he killed every year. First of all, we know he served in the Marine Corps for 3 years in 1990 before being less than honourably discharged. 1990 is also the decade where he claims to have started killing. I believe his failure may have caused him to feel powerless and rejected compared to the power he felt while in the military. This led to him murdering women to feel powerful over them in a similar vein to Ted Bundy. I believe he killed much less frequently in the 90s, around 15 victims in Gary, Indiana. I then believe something happened in 2000 that led him to wanting to kill more people. Perhaps this could be being arrested for domestic violence that is stated on his Wikipedia, though I couldn't find a date for this. He then began killing in Chicago because there were much more possible victims and he found that it would be easier to hide the bodies in a big city. This led to him murdering between 3 and 8 people a year. Even killing 2 women in one night. Double events are common among serial killers. Ted Bundy killed 2 people in a night after escaping prison. Some people believe this may be because the first kill was so pleasurable, they killed straight after to relive the high. We know he was in Texas in 2007, where he committed a sexual assault. He likely fled the state soon after. He was not caught for another 2 years. I can't explain why there was only one case in 2008. Perhaps he found another way to express his anger or killed elsewhere. There was a murder in 2008 in Gary, Indiana that fit a pattern recognised by Thomas Hargrove's algorithm that I think would be reasonable to associate it with Darren Dion Van. In 2009, you can see a spike from the last year. I think this was due to his marriage falling apart and leading to a divorce. This caused him to go back to Chicago. He may have also known that the police were catching up to him for his crimes in Texas. And then, in September 2009, Darren Dion Van was arrested for sexual assault and sentenced to 5 years in prison. You can see a clear drop in cases after his arrest, but there still are some. He is then released in 2013 and likely returns to Gary. He may have killed 1 more woman in Chicago, but I believe Darren ceases to be the Chicago Strangler after he was arrested. He then goes on a rampage through Gary, murdering 7 women before being arrested and confessing. Obviously, this might not be the case and it's just speculation, but I think it's interesting to look at why he might have done it and to try and spot patterns to explain why he might have been so inconsistent with his murders. So, if we switch back to the overall board, it should start to make a lot more sense. It should explain the links between news articles and paint a picture for how one man managed to kill so many people. The only thing is, if Darren was in prison for most of the 2010s, why did the strangulation still happen? Well, if you remember, Thomas Hargrove said he believed there to be multiple Chicago Stranglers. I think I found the time frame where 2 more killers could be active. 2009 to 2014 is the time when I'd say is the most likely for, who I'm going to call, but it's not an official name, the West Alley Strangler. I call him that because of a group of 4 murders in the west side of Chicago, all in alleys, located just there. It is possible that he could have been killing long before 2009, but it works as a clear divide between the first Chicago Strangler and his successor. I associate 9 victims with the West Alley killings, though 4 of those could have been committed by Van in 2009 and 2014. I believe this man was not so dependent on killing as Van, as they were much less frequent. I believe in 2012 he probably died, was arrested for a different crime, possibly one of the 24 stranglings that were solved, or moved away. This is because in the next 4 years only 1 strangling occurred. The case in 2014 is something I'm not too sure on. On one hand, it could be part of the West Alley slayings, but then again, it had been 1.5 years since he last struck. On the other hand, this could be the work of Darren Dion Van, as he was out of prison and killing at this time, but I don't know why he would have returned to Chicago just to kill 1 person while he was so busy in Gary. In my opinion, this is an isolated incident. I believe it to be just a regular homicide where the killer managed to get away, as so many stranglers do in Chicago. So, apart from this exception, Chicago has been strangler-free for 4 years, until 2017 saw 2 strangulations that fit the pattern and 2018 saw 4. Then the report was published. I have seen that another 4 were killed in 2018, bringing the total up to 55, but I couldn't find my source to back that up. I've attributed 6 to 8 victims to him, but I do believe he probably killed likely more around the 12 range. I've called him the pair strangler as there were 3 areas, each with 2 bodies found, hence pairs. And unlike the West Alley Strangler, I actually have a potential suspect for this set of crimes. Arthur Hillard was arrested in 2019 for the murder of Diamond Turner in 2017. Diamond Turner was originally considered a Chicago Strangler victim, and Hillard was considered a potential suspect among theorists. I believe he should be considered a possible suspect in the pair killings, as he is definitely responsible for one of them. Let's look at some more evidence then. Arthur Hillard's MO was very similar to the other 50 crimes, strangulation and then dumped around the city. I do think it's possible that the man who is responsible could have been responsible for any of the other crimes in the other 2 crime sprees, and vice versa, but splitting into 3 different eras makes the most sense to me and makes it easier for visualization purposes. We also know that Arthur Hillard is probably a serial killer, whether you count the pair killings or not, as he is under investigation for other murders, as he was previously arrested for trying to conceal a crippled girl in a dumpster with multiple stab wounds. Which makes me wonder, why was he convicted of that and not murder? How did the police know/suspect he was hiding someone else's work? And it's weirder if he didn't kill her. I couldn't find much on this guy. I did a background check and a sex offender check, but I didn't find anything. I wish I could elaborate a bit more, but hey ho. I guess he was concealing a dead body that he didn't murder himself. However, the fact that he stuffs bodies in bins in alleyways in the west side of Chicago does align with the Strangler. Although, she was stabbed in a wheelchair and he was stupid enough to use the alleyway behind the building he lived in. If I had more evidence, I'd be more confident, but I'd say that this could be his first kill, as it doesn't match the other murders he committed, if he did this one, and was sloppy. Thanks for watching. If you could like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, that'd be much appreciated, and feel free to leave a comment.